And we're live. Hello,
We are.
everybody. Woohoo! I'm Meghann Conter and Jessica Fernley, and we're here today with Maddy Niebauer. And this is a really exciting topic, Jess, don't you think?
Yeah, it super is. I'm sorry. The start of it took me by surprise. I feel like normally it counts us in for like 5 seconds or something. So I was like
We got
staring
dropped into
into
the water,
space.
right? Walked into the water. Just go ahead,
Straight
swim.
in. It's good. It's good. But yes, we are here with a very wonderful guest today. I'm super excited for the conversation that we're going to have with you, Maddy. Like, Meghann, would you like to sort of give like more of a drum roll introduction to Maddy?
Definitely. Definitely, for sure. So, what I love about these shows is our informality around things. And I could sit here and read Maddie's bio, which, everybody else will make sure that is linked in the notes. But what we asked Maddie about when we wanted to talk about, the concept of 7-figure business owner, great. Like, there's 2% of women owned businesses in the States that get to that mark. But what happens when you surpass that 7 figures and you start going into 8 figures? And that's what Maddy has done. And so surpassing 8 figures as a woman in business, it takes some different commitments. Let's say it takes some different mindset. It takes quite a bit of nuance. So we're going to talk about that today. And what I loved about what Maddy said when we asked her, why is women running 7-figure businesses, 8-figure businesses, 9-figure. Why is that important? And she said, I want to see more women run $1 million businesses because women will create the work environments we all need to be successful in both work and life. Cultures that value both achievement and sustainability, that are rooted in trust, that center relationships, that are flexible and allow us to work when, how, and where suits us best, and that give us the freedom to support the people and pursue the passions in our lives. So that is Maddy's attitude in a nutshell about business. And you will rarely see her running around with her hair on fire. You will see her more frequently getting on her boat, not this time of year, because I'm sure it would be freezing cold, but for most of the months in Madison or traveling around the globe, because that has been her commitment since day one. So, Maddy, we are super excited to have you today.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that lovely introduction, Meghann. I appreciate it, and I'm excited to talk to you guys today.
Yes, for those who are here watching us live, we will keep our eyes on the chat. So if you have any comments, questions, thoughts, please feel free to put those in and we will make sure that we interact with them. Jess, is there anything else you'd like to say as we integrate and jump into this topic?
Maddy, I really love the introduction that you gave to Meghann for to say that, and I just think it's everything that you're saying is so important. We need more 7, 8, 9 figure women entrepreneurs. So I am super glad that you're here with us today, and I can't wait for what you have to tell us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So let's go ahead and dive in and start with Maddy. Why don't you give us the 10,000-foot view story of what brought you to today? Did you start vChief when you were 12 years old and, in your parents' basement, and then rebuild it or build it to where it is today? No. And
Yeah,
just sort of what's that the story of your life?
absolutely. Well, I'll give you just a super brief version of life before vChief, just so people know, what the platform was for jumping off. After college, I was in the Peace Corps in Ivory Coast and had an amazing experience there. And then I ran a tutoring center for several years in the Bay Area. Then I went to business school in New York. And then I did strategy consulting with nonprofits and foundations with an organization called Bridgespan, which spun off from Bain and Company. And then I moved to Wisconsin with my family, and I got a job working for Teach for America as a chief of staff. And amusingly, it was a role that I fell into. I was applying for a different role on the team, and then for a variety of reasons, they decided not to fill the role I was applying for, but they were like, we like you, and how about this other job being a chief of staff? And I was like, well, I don't even know what a chief of staff is or what one does, but I liked the woman that I was going to work for, and I figured I could figure it out. So I jumped in with 2 feet, and it was a really great fit for me. I loved the combination of doing both sort of strategic planning, but also a lot of execution and implementation, and just helping support this leader to be the best leader that she could be. And so I stayed in that role for quite a while. And then she left to start a new nonprofit, and I moved into a different role at TFA. And then after a handful of months, she came back and was like, "Hey, Maddy, I need you back in my life. Will you moonlight with me 5 or 10 hours a week?" And being my chief of staff again. And I was excited to do that because I missed her and I missed being a chief of staff. And that side gig that I was doing for her was sort of the start of vChief. And I don't think I realized it at the time because I was, perfectly happy in my role at TFA. But the more I did that work with her and the more I thought about it, it seemed like there was probably a market out there for other people who could use that chief of staff capacity, but might not have the budget or the workload to need someone in the role full time. So why couldn't you have something similar to the virtual assistant model, but for the chief of staff role, which for people who aren't familiar with it, it's a bit more strategic and operational, right? So you might be making strategic plans, you might be leading cross-organizational projects, you do a lot of communications and systems creation and other things like that. And you're really a leader's right-hand partner and helping take things off their plate. So it started as a side gig. And then I was like, okay, let's do this. And initially, frankly, I was thinking very small. I was like, okay, I'll get a few other clients and then, just be sort of like a part-time chief of staff myself. Right. And then a variety of factors happened and I decided to really build more of a business out of it. And that was, I started in 2016. So it's been about 6.5 years. And yeah, that's how the whole ball got rolling.
Awesome. Love it. Jessica, do you have any follow-up questions?
Yeah, I do. So I would love to ask you, Maddy, was it always the plan? I mean, you're talking about it as like a side hustle. Were you thinking, oh yeah, I really want like an 8-figure side hustle?
If we could all have 8-figure side hustles. Yeah, no, not at all. It's funny. I mean, really what I wanted when I started it was flexibility. I wanted to be able to work where I wanted. And I had a good deal of flexibility at TFA. I had always worked remotely there. So, I was literally in Costa Rica when I was deciding to start this company. And so I just wanted the ability to be able to travel and live this life with my family and not feel like I was at the whim of some company that was going to dictate what I was going to do. And I think where things changed for me, there were 2 things that changed for me. One was I was reading The 4-Hour Workweek, which was all the rage back then. And it talked a lot about like not just trading your time for money. And that was the concept that stuck with me a lot. I was like, oh, I can get freedom by not, being employed by a company and like owning my own time, but I can get way more freedom if I'm not, being a chief of staff all the time. Right. And so that concept hit me pretty hard. I think the other thing was when I started to sort of put the word out and network and share this idea, I was floored by the amount of interest that people had. Everyone thought it was a brilliant idea. People were like, I know people who can use this. I can use this myself. And so I was like, oh, this is more than me having like 3 or 4 clients. Like there's a real idea here. And I think the combination of those 2 things led me to say, okay, this is bigger than like Maddy as chief of staff. This is a real concept. And I don't know what I thought when I was going out the door. I don't think I thought, oh, I want to build this into, an 8-figure business by any means. I was just like, okay, well, let's see what we can do. Let's find some folks who can jump into this work with me. And so I think one of the critical decisions that I made in the early days was I kept that original client who's my former boss and who I love dearly. I kept serving her as her chief of staff for about the first year. And then I found someone else to support her, but I didn't take on any of the other new clients myself. Like I immediately turned into matchmaker and found the talent and found the clients and put them together. And that really allowed me the time to grow the business, right? Because if I was doing the work, I wouldn't have had the time to think about, okay, what's business development? What's finance? What are all the different pieces that go into building a business?
Yeah, that's so smart because actually I help women who they're struggling with the delivery, and then trying to like do the delivery, but also the strategic thinking behind growing the business, reaching out, making those connections that you need to sort of secure the clients that will be beyond that first. Because I think quite often people who do this kind of work, they have like their first client, and it is often one that's like someone who's really close to their heart, and there's a story there behind like how they know them. But I think it's really smart what you're saying, that like you got out of that delivery sort of after the first year, because it's really hard to split yourself in two for that kind of dynamic. Meghann, what would you say?
Yeah, it's interesting because we did a show last month on the concept of value versus volume coaching and value versus volume business. And I was a coach first, and then created the Dames and thought about expanding it because I didn't want to be having to do all of the things, and I wanted to be able to stop trading time for money and get myself out of the driver's seat. So I'm always looking at Maddy like, oh, she's doing it so well. And the interesting part for me is that I've got this real desire for human connection and having that deep connection with members. And so that's where I'm struggling, because I see you in that space of like, okay, I'm just not putting myself in the client delivery role at all. And I continue to be in that role to a certain extent, and continue to now be looking at how do I get myself out of that role, and I can still make choices to be where I want to be with the people I want to be around.
Yeah,
but that's interesting.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I think a thing that's hard about that too is that like so many people are growing the business based on their own reputation, right? Because especially in a service business or a coaching business or whatever, like you are what people know of you, right? And I think it's hard for people then to say, okay, come work with us, and you're basing it on our reputation, but I'm also going to have other people work with you. And so I think sometimes it has to be a bit of a staggered approach. Like yes, I let go of client work fairly early, but like I was still doing all the other things internally with the business in terms of connecting both with clients and with our talent. And it took me a lot longer to let go of those pieces. So I think it's just a sort of a continual evolution, right, over time.
Definitely.
Absolutely. And I love that you talked about that when we did your 7-figure. I'm spacing on the name of what my own thing is called right now. But anyways, Maddy is a Dame of Influence, and we really had an amazing interview together where she talked more about that timeline and how it wasn't just all of it right off the bat. It wasn't full freedom from the business and full freedom in time and full, you've gone through a series of events. And so, that's been really cool to watch and to see. But how have you made sure that you always keep for yourself? Let's just talk about you first. That you have made sure that personal growth and your own lifestyle is always important and is always the first thing considered, because you have 3 kids that you're raising. You have a life. You and your husband travel. You do a lot outside of just your work. So what have you done specifically to make sure that that was always at the forefront?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think that was built in from the very, very beginning. As I said, we were in Costa Rica when I founded the business. I knew we wanted to take some big trips. So we spent like 9 months into starting the business, we went to South America for 6 months, and then we came home for 6 months, and then we went to Asia for 6 months. We keep leaving in winter because we live in Wisconsin. It's cold.
Mm-hmm.
And so our kids normally go to public school, but we yank them out of school and then go and sort of world school them on these adventures. We bought a minivan. We drove all across South America. It was incredible, right? But it's incredibly hard to run a business and do that at the same time, right? So that actually was the impetus to me letting go of client work, right? Was that trip to South America, because I'm like supposed to be on a call with my client, and it's like 2:00 on a Tuesday and we're driving in the Andes. And I'm like, how am I supposed to get on this call? Right. And so those big trips were actually, and those were things that like, though I was growing the business and though I knew I wanted the business to be successful, there were just things that we wanted to do in life. And I was not going to sacrifice that for the business, right? Like if the business was going to be unsuccessful because I did that, fine. I would go get a job when we came back, right? We had enough resources, but I also it had been built up enough that I felt confident that like I could work a minimal amount, right? On that trip, I tried to work, about 10 hours a week. It proved hard with the client work, but anyways, lessons learned. And I was just unforgiving about it. It was just like, this is what we're doing. If that means the business is going to not succeed or going to grow a lot slower, then so be it, right? And I think because within the first 2 years of the business, I spent a year of it abroad. And like the second trip was in Asia. It was crazy time zone difference, right? Like it was impossible to do client work there. Like I think it grew a lot slower than it might have otherwise, but that was fine with me, right? Like I didn't, like I said, I didn't go into this thinking like I want this to be a 7-figure or an 8-figure business. I was like, I want this to be a business that supports me and my family, and that represents our values and all the other things. But I do think like taking the trip was an incredible opportunity to sort of step back and say like, where do I need to focus, right? Like what is the thing that only I can do? And that has changed over time, the like, what can only I do, right? At the time, the biggest shifts were I used to talk to every single applicant who wanted to work with us and every single client. So my first shift was having someone else on our team. And we had, at that time, we didn't really have a central team. It was like me and a handful of contractors. So I hired a couple more contractors who were like the client service people. So they were going to talk to the client first and just make sure that they're real, right? And that they need what we offer. Just get rid of the riffraff, right? And so every call I had was a productive call. And I still did the calls, right? I was still in every piece of that process, but someone else had done the first step, so I didn't have to do that. And then same thing when I went to Asia, like I just really couldn't be on calls very often. So I actually let go a bit more and let some people, like our team, talk to clients until they were really ready to go. And I stopped, needing to interview every single person or whatnot. So it was honestly like a little bit of piecemeal of like letting things go, but being unapologetic that like, this is my priority is, this trip with my family. And I think it's hard for leaders to sometimes to like take a step back and prioritize themselves and the people in their lives and the passions. And I think, like, I feel very fortunate and blessed and recognize 100% the privilege that I have to be able to do that. Right. But I also think lots of people have that privilege and don't take it because they feel this pressure from themselves or from society that like, I have to hustle. And I just think there's this mindset thing that's like, well, you got to figure out like the dimension on which you want to hustle.
The dimension on which you want to hustle.
Yeah. Right?
Like,
I think that's really powerful because I just think as women that it's like we're waiting for our permission slip to make some of these changes. And it's realizing that like we have to give it to ourselves. It's probably never going to come because actually other people don't expect us to take our cues from what they say we can and can't do. But then I guess the flip side of that is that there may be people who don't approve, don't agree, don't think it's a good
there were a lot of people who did not agree with our plans.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's getting to that point in life, isn't it, where you're just like, it's fine for you to feel like that because this is actually my choice and my life. And that's a decision that I made. Maddy, I want to ask you, you touched on this a little bit, but like something that I help clients with all the time is that when they're going through business growth, they're like, what do I do first? Because I need the clients so that there's work for the team, but I need the team. And like, how do I make sure that both of these things increase at the same time? It's a really tricky balancing act, isn't it? Like staggering some of that growth and making sure you don't end up in a situation where your team is completely over capacity and like the clients are like, why did you like take me on? Because this is rubbish. But at the same time, like then suddenly if you're paying out for a ton of new team members and then they're like, we don't really have anything to do.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And I would say it doesn't go away at like, we haven't quite figured it out, right? Like, yes, I think there were some things that we did that I think were really smart. So we started by only hiring contractors, right? Everybody on our team was a 1099 until last year, which was a long time into the business, 5 years into the business. Our whole central team and we didn't have much of a central team, but like maybe 5 or 8 people who were helping in different ways. And those people might have worked 5 hours a week. They might have worked 20 hours a week. It would really depend on what their project was and what their workload was. Our consultants, the people who work with our clients, are all still 1099s. And that is a model that works for us because most of the people who work for us as consultants are people who are coming out of W-2 jobs. They want to kind of start their own consulting practice, but maybe they haven't built their pipeline of clients. Maybe they don't like doing business development. And so they're happy to just have something through us that is flexible, that they can do when they want. And they don't have to go find the clients, right? And then many of them, will go and find their own clients and eventually sort of, work their way out of us, right? Like they'll find their own clients for most of the time. But it can be a good stepping stone for them.
I always say to clients, like, never forget like how much you are giving someone a golden opportunity, because like lots of people can do the work, but like most people can't get the clients. So if you're able to provide an opportunity for them to just do the work and not have to worry about the business development and sort of front load their whole business based on how good they are at sales in that particular moment, I'm like, never forget. So that is an amazing thing to be able to offer someone.
Yeah, no, because it's true. Like it's hard and a lot of people don't like it and a lot of people aren't great at it. And so like I think the value proposition for us, and there's so many people out there who want work that is like remote and part-time and flexible and well-paying and interesting, right? And yes, there's a bit more of it now after COVID, but when we started, there was almost none of it. And so because of that, we've always been drowning in talent. Like we've always had more people in our pool of talent than we have staffed on projects, which we kind of need anyways, because, we want to match clients with someone who has like industry background and functional expertise and all these things, right? So you need to have a little bit of excess in the system. But even on our central team, as I said, like we didn't have much of a central team at first, but what we were able to do was grow as we needed it. So I'm not paying someone, a full-time salary when I don't need full-time capacity. And that worked for a really long time. And then we realized to get the talent we want centrally, we really need to have W-2s. We need to provide health insurance. We need to do all those things. To get the folks that we wanted to build the company internally, right? So we have a whole business development team, we have a talent team, we have a finance team, we have people who do placement and matching, and that part of the team grew incredibly rapidly. Basically, over the past year and a bit, we grew from 0 full-time employees to now we have 20. And there were some growing pains in there, right? Like we had some challenges, I'm not going to lie. And we're still working out, like, where are the teams that have too much capacity? Where are the teams that don't have enough capacity? How do we shift people around and also like lean into the team members' skills and make sure that, people are doing the work both that they like and that they're good at. And so, I mean, that I think has been our biggest sort of secret to growth, is really leveraging sort of part-time fractional contractor-based talent. And honestly, that's sort of what we offer to our clients too, right? Like they're hiring us as contractors for as many hours as they need. And they might need 5 hours a week. And in a year, they might need 20 hours a week, and we can grow with them. And then eventually they'll probably need a full-time person. And then either they can hire our person or we help them find a person. So no,
that makes a lot of sense, because actually the thing I was going to go on and ask you, and you've kind of answered this already, is that sometimes it can be really difficult to find people who are actually like skilled at a high enough level and willing to do fractional work. And something that like my clients say quite a lot is that they find someone and they're like, oh, that they're amazing, they'd be such a great addition to the team, but they want FTE and they want a 200K salary plus benefits. And like when you're at 7 figures, that's a significant chunk of the business to be giving away. And so like actually finding that sweet spot of like they've got the right skill set and they're reasonable about the fact that they're coming on board a small business where they're not going to be able to match their corporate salary. And yes, you can do things with like sort of bonus arrangements and profit shares and stuff like that to sort of make it stack up. But have you? It doesn't sound like you actually have found it a challenge to find those fractional opportunities.
No, I mean, honestly, I think we've just been really lucky that a lot of people have wanted to do that, right? And I don't know how much of that. I mean, it started before COVID, right? And we always, like, in terms of the people who are working with our clients, we've never had trouble. I think on our central team, we did realize that, you know, we needed the W-2 people. I think, and Meghann knows, we've had some conversations about this, like thinking about things like bonuses and profit sharing and equity and other things, right? Like those were things I had big questions about, because, you know, our business is really successful. I want to share the wealth. I want to make sure that people feel well compensated and that they want to stay, right? And you know, I think we have a lot of our roots in nonprofit, because I came from nonprofit and a lot of our team comes from nonprofits. So that, I guess, was helpful in like people's expectations on the compensation side. They were like, this seems totally reasonable. Also, I think the other thing is we, from the very beginning of having W-2 employees, we instituted a 4-day, 32-hour work week. And so even if we're not paying crazy corporate style salaries, like people are still getting this benefit that they're like, it's pretty rare out there to find. And so I think the people who are drawn to us are people who are not always necessarily motivated by just money, right? Like they're people like me who want that balance, who want, you know, to be able to center the other things in their lives. And so I think that has helped us. Yeah.
So I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go Meghann. I was literally going to say, Meghann, I feel like we haven't heard from you for a few minutes.
It's all good. So a lot of people talk about creating an awesome culture.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about what are the specific things that you've done to create that, like tangible, tactical things.
Yeah. I think first and foremost is in hiring and making sure that you're hiring the right people. And when I say the right people, it's not just about their skills, right? It's a lot about how do they fit into the culture and the values of your organization. And like, we have a no jerks policy. Like you can't work here and be a jerk. And you know, we've made some decisions around that. And so if people aren't acting in alignment with our values, like that doesn't work here, right? And so I think part of it is modeling, right? Like what we expect, both in terms of performance, but just attitude, right? Like that. And like in terms of actual tactical things, I think there's a few things we do, because we're a virtual organization, right? So we don't, there are still many members of our team I have not met in person, because they were hired after our last retreat. We do one full team retreat every year and one leadership team retreat every year. And those I think are incredibly important, especially as a virtual organization, because you just can't replace like in-person time and relationship building. So that's one piece of it. But I think also just creating space for people to get to know each other as people intentionally, right? And that might just be the first 5 or 10 minutes of a call, everybody talking about their weekends or their dogs or their kids or whatever, right? There's also, you know, we use Slack. And so there's, my assistant is kind of charged with like culture building on Slack. So she has like a topic every week that she asks people questions about, and they put answers. So you sort of get to know people. And then we have Thankful Thursdays where everybody goes on and like shouts out whoever's they're in love with from the team this week. And what did they do? That was so great. And so there's little things like that. And then obviously, like, you know, we have team calls, and we take some time in those team calls for team building, like smaller breakout groups for people to talk through topics or things like that. So I think just, you know, being intentional and finding time for people to connect with each other on stuff like that. And like, we also just revamped our core values, and that was a whole org-wide. I actually had very little to do with it. Like, there's a whole committee that did it, and people all different levels working with other people from different levels, which I think is just a great way to like break down silos and stuff like that.
I was going to put you on the spot and ask you what your values are, but since you just redid them, that might actually be very easy to do.
Literally just redid them. Yeah.
It's okay. We'll share them at another time. That was an important one for me.
Yeah.
Jess, where would you like to go?
Oh, I've got so many like things
I know.
coming.
Competing thoughts in your brain, right?
Exactly. Well, Maddy, I would love to ask you kind of what have been the biggest surprises in the journey of your business? Like, what have been the things that now you look back and you're like, yeah, I just really didn't know that at the time?
It seems like a slightly ridiculous thing to say, but like the importance of a properly executed contract. Like we've definitely had some clients do some shady things, like including changing the price on a contract just to be what they wanted it to be. And I'm like, really?
Don't send it as a Word document.
Right. And so now every single contract that has any change at all goes to the lawyers. I'm like, this $20,000 mistake could have paid for a lot of lawyer hours, which seems silly, but those are the kinds of things that get you like really emotionally charged because you're like, I feel like someone's trying to screw me, and that makes me really mad. And so that's one example. I think the other thing is like just thinking through, like, for example, when we started, we had clients who wanted to hire our people, and we had something in the contract that was basically a conversion fee, right? It's like, if you want to bring them onto your team and no longer pay vChief, like you have to pay us a certain amount. That amount was not nearly high enough at the beginning to reflect both like what they were getting, which was basically an executive search service and a chance to try out the person and make sure they're good, and like the lost revenue. And so there were situations where like that just always made me kind of sad when like they took their person, because I was like, especially when we were small, because I was like, oh, I'm losing this awesome person from my talent pool. And yes, I'm happy for them if they are happy to go work for you, and I'm happy for you to have them, but still it felt just not.
It's that thing of like, this isn't really what we intended this to be, and so people are finding their own shortcut, and it like that would hurt my feelings. I would feel that deeply.
Yeah. And so I think like now we've just created a system where like we talk about it up front. If you want to hire your person, this is what you're going to pay us. If that feels like too much, you can break it into payments, whatever. And then I think people, recognize the value of it, and then we can all walk away feeling okay about it, right? Like, and I don't get sad and crabby. I think the other thing that we learned in a painful way was the importance of having really strong, like, financial support. So we always had outsourced accountants. I had this one woman with me for the longest time. She was amazing, but she also had a full-time job, and eventually it just got to be too much. And because we scaled our growth incredibly rapidly over a period of time, like the amount of time we needed accounting support probably went from like 15 hours a week to like 80 hours a week within like a handful of months, right? And so we had a new external accountant who frankly just didn't have the capacity to do what we needed. And therefore our books became a complete disaster that have taken like a year to dig out of. And that's
a really high risk situation. I think that probably resonates for quite a few of us.
Right. And then like
when you're scaling, you're so vulnerable as well. And so like it's when suddenly your tax bill jumps up, and you need to know that that's going to happen. If you suddenly get the like moment, and
you need to have, be on the ball with like your accounts receivable, because you can't come back to people 6 months later and be like, oh, you forgot to pay us. And we literally have like over $100,000 in receivables from 2021. And because the books are so screwed up, people were like, you haven't paid us. They're like, yes, we have. And then we have to like go through 87 different things to figure out who else didn't pay us. Anyways,
like really
tribulation, but I will say it inspired us to like hire a couple people directly onto our team in finance. We do still have some external folks who support us on that, but they have done an incredible job like moving the ship, and I feel so much better about where we are, but it was not at the cost of some pain.
Yeah, and if it's all right, I also have a follow-up question.
Yes.
Meghann, is that allowable?
Of course.
I always love to ask this of women who've got to 7 and 8 figures, but like, how has your life changed as like this business has grown? Like, do you drive a gold Ferrari? Do you have a swimming pool filled only with banknotes? Like, what does life feel like for kind of, and like, what have been the changes, would you say?
I think a gold Ferrari would be really heavy. Just saying, it would probably weigh like 12,000
You don't need to drive it. You just need to have a photo of yourself
Of
lounging
oh,
against
I
it
see. Yeah.
for Instagram.
I did buy myself my dream car, which is not a gold Ferrari. It was a Mini Cooper, and I am obsessed with it, and it's so much fun. I did, however, still buy it used, and it was not that expensive. I for sure could have bought it if I just had a regular job, but I love it. We're still pretty frugal, except I would say for this new house that we built that was not cheap to begin with, and then through a variety of things got more and more expensive. We had a contractor steal a bunch of money from us, and he ended up getting arrested, and then it was a whole thing.
Wow.
And it took a very long time to build. So I would say this beautiful house on the lake is probably the biggest difference, which I'm grateful for every day when I wake up and watch the sun rise over the lake. And you know, like otherwise I would say it hasn't actually changed that much. Like we traveled a ton before, so we still travel. I mean, yes, maybe we've taken slightly more expensive trips, but I'm still so cheap about things. I'm like, we will not fly first class. That's insane. And like, we don't need to stay at the Four Seasons unless I can stay on points, in which case bring it on. So yeah, I don't know. My husband keeps being like, when are we allowed to fly first class? I'm like, no. That seems silly. I mean, maybe for like an overnight trip to Asia or something.
You're like, I still have Midwest values. Come on.
I do. It's hard. It's hard.
I don't know. I think it's good for the kids in a sense, isn't it? Not to be too pampered and stuff. It's fine for the grown-ups because you know we've done the hard graft, but
So I'm curious to go back to this permission slip. Yeah. Because earlier we talked about that, and I was thinking about how I was waiting before I quit drinking 5 years ago. I was waiting for someone to walk up to me and hand me a permission slip that said, if you stop drinking, it will make a lot of things a lot easier. It will make it so that you feel a lot better physically, and it will make it so that you've removed a giant barricade that's been in front of you and that keeps popping up and that you just keep tripping over. I was waiting for someone to actually come up to me and like hand me that, right? I was waiting for a doctor to tell me. I was waiting for a therapist to tell me, whatever. But I think that that's a really interesting, I don't even know what we said it from in the beginning, what you said permission slip about. But we as women tend to wait for permission slips for things. And I think, Maddy, wasn't it about just like creating a business that doesn't make you be a slave? Was that what you were talking about?
Yeah, I think so.
I think that's what it was. So I'm curious if there's any other permission slips that we've either waited for someone to deliver to us, or we currently are maybe waiting for someone to deliver to us. So, and maybe this is all just me, but I know that like just this week alone, I'm sitting here waiting. I was waiting for someone to hand me a week off, and I was going to be traveling to Charleston and traveling to Salt Lake. And I was waiting for people to hand me that permission slip to say, look, you've been running on empty and putting 50 cents in your tank and trying to get $13 out of it for the last several months. It's not going to work for you. So I had to give myself that permission slip yesterday, and only doing this because I love the two of you and I wanted to be here with both of you. And I realized in this conversation, like, we can either continue to put our heads down and try to achieve our goals and make that what's the most important, or we can flip the script and say, actually, what's more important to me is these things. And then I'm going to reverse engineer to figure out how I can have my life be that way. So what advice do you have, Maddy? Do you have, Jess, for how to do that? Because that sounds really nice on paper, but I bet you there are people who are listening that are going to be
doing it is so much more messy. So and like Meghann, that resonates so much with me. Like I had really severe burnout / a breakdown 12 years ago. And I basically had it because I was waiting for someone to tell me that I didn't have to keep going any longer, but no one did, because that's kind of life, isn't it? That's being an adult. We need to give ourselves that permission slip. And like the result for me was, it was absolutely huge. And I think I've often looked back and been like, if I could do one thing differently, I would have just not got to that point. I would have stopped so much sooner. But I think that's the whole point, isn't it? It's that personal growth of like I can trust my own instincts. We are conditioned, I think, as women to not be allowed to trust our instincts because we're overly emotional. We always overreact, all these kinds of things. But I think that's how we get the that's how we get the self-knowledge and understanding, by just sometimes getting it spectacularly wrong and then having to deal with the fallout and being like, let's learn some lessons, let's not do this again.
Yes. Amen. Amen. I hear you so much on all of that. And it's funny, this like permission slip topic really resonates for me lately. I think for a couple of reasons. One, like it's funny, just last week, my sort of number two in the company, my head of growth, like sat me down for a little chat because we're doing budget planning for next year, and we're trying to figure out, like what are our revenue goals, what are our expenses, et cetera. And part of that process is every team comes up with goals and whatever. And so the offices of the CEO needs to come up with some plans and think about our resources and other things. And I've said for the past year or so that my role is going to be more external. I'm going to do more speaking and do more networking and go to more events, et cetera. As my number two person takes on more of the internal stuff, which is in fact the direction we're going. But she said to me, she's like, Maddy, you keep saying you want to go out there and be a speaker, but I don't see you like being energized by that work. Like, is that something that you really want to do? Or do you want to just be like, it's okay, I can take a step back, I can just be the owner, I can not run the day-to-day, but also not feel obliged to go do this thing that may or may not bring me joy and satisfaction, right? And it has caused this introspection for me about like what is next and what makes sense. Like I actually like letting go of pieces of the business as time went on was in some ways hard for me and in some ways freeing, right? Like the last thing I gave away was matching clients and consultants, because frankly, I'm really good at it. And I really love it. Like when you get the right match and the client's like, this is my perfect person. And I'm like, I know, I told you that was going to be your perfect person. Sometimes you have to like convince them to interview that person. And then they're like, how did you know? And I'm like, I just know. So it was really hard to let that go. But eventually now, like I'm kind of happy to be free of it because it's such a big piece of our work. And it was just taking up all of my time. And so now I'm at this place where I'm like, kind of trying to figure out the next step for me, right? Like vChief will continue vChiefing, and like we're expanding and doing new products and the team is growing. There's lots of things, right? And I want to be there to support it all, but I don't need to run it all. And so then it's like, well, what is the next step for me? And there's part of me that's like, well, I kind of want to try this speaking thing a little bit more. Like there's parts of that I find really energizing, and there's parts of it that I find draining. Like the actual talking to people I love. It's the like figuring out who I should be talking to and what are your target audiences and all of that stuff. If someone else can do that for me, then I'll just show up and talk. So that's currently the plan, but we'll see. But I think the other piece of me is like, do I want to do something new? Like I have lots of other entrepreneurial ideas. Like, do I want to do, or what would it look like to just like take a step back and do more travel and not feel obliged to work for the sake of working, right? And there's part of me that is the like type A achiever that like can't imagine not like I probably only work like 20 hours a week, but to work less than that feels crazy to me, right? And so it's like, well, what in the world would I do all day? And like, what will bring me joy and satisfaction and all of those things? So I think that is a big piece of the permission slip for me. And then I think the other thing that I've recently sort of given myself permission to do, write my own permission slip, is like we've gone on these big crazy trips with our family, right? But now our eldest is in high school, and my husband and I had a long talk about whether it's like okay to continue taking the kids out of school to go on these trips. And I think we've decided through much disagreement, if we're honest, not to do that, at least in a long-term sort of way. Like maybe we'll take an extra week at spring break kind of thing. But then I'm like, I'm not going to sit here all winter, people. It's horrible. So we are giving ourselves permission to travel without the kids, and in fact, sometimes without each other. So like my husband's going to take some trips this winter. I'm going to take some trips this winter. We will hopefully take some trips together, and we will do a trip with the kids over spring break. But but that's hard to do too, because like you said, all this pressure on women and like this expectation that like you have to be there for your kids all the time, and like is that okay? And there's still part of me that really struggles with that. And I know my kids are going to be crabby about it because they're so used to me working from home and me being available all the time, right? And I've been traveling more for work lately, you know, and they always like, I think the lead up to it is the worst, right? Like they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna miss you so much," and then once I'm gone, it's fine. So I don't know, but that resonates with me. This whole like permission.
I
think
think
it's
that's a
also
really challenging thing. Oh, sorry, Meghann.
Oh no, we were on top of each other. It's all good. I think that with women and our changing and ever changing roles, as we step more into leading 7 and 8 figure companies, and as we step into continuing to grow, it's really important for us to do so with, it's almost like with this attitude of, I really don't care what culture thinks. Like, if I need to leave to go for a month to get out of the cold frozen tundra, I'm going to do it because that's going to be helpful to me and it's going to be helpful to my family. And it doesn't really matter what anyone else thinks. It doesn't really matter what society thinks. But when we get to that point where we've decided to create a new reality for ourselves, I think that gets to come in along with it. And you know, even just things like I have friends who sleep in separate beds from their husbands because their husbands make a lot of noise, and or whatever, you know, I sleep like the lightest feather on the face of the planet. So, you know, these things that we can do to make these decisions, I'm like, yes, I would love my own king bed, please. That sounds delicious and delightful. But we get to start doing these things that are for ourselves personally and professionally that are going to be very contradictory to what society says we should do. I can only imagine what the Brits would say, Jessica, you know, to some of these things, right? Oh, like the abhorrence, or the, you know, how terrible it would be for us American women, or us, any women, to do things of our own free will that aren't culturally what a mom should do, or what. It's just crazy.
I get a lot of you're really lucky that your husband is willing to look after the children for you and stuff like that when I go on trips. And it's like, yeah, because you know they're my kids. He had no part in, you know, he's not their dad or anything. Like he is. But I think that's the thing. It's kind of part of that is that our generation have this freedom and this ability to create businesses, have agency, create wealth, travel with or without our partners and children if we choose. And I think previous generations of women in particular have not had those freedoms. You know, like I quite often think about, you know, for like my grandparents' generation, like with no labor saving devices, laundry was a job that had to be done. It took all day. It was physical, backbreaking labor. Like just the fact that like we can actually often hire people to do that for us, and it's kind of just a machine. You press the button and it kind of does it all for you. I think that we feel I think sometimes the judgment of previous generations because we are experiencing freedoms that they have never known. And so I think it kind of helps me anyway to understand it in those terms, so that it's just like, this isn't them thinking that I'm an awful person. This is them reflecting the frustrations and the limitations and the things that they missed out on because of how society was versus how it is for us now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is so fascinating to me. What did you have any other business related questions or any other questions you wanted to make sure to ask today, Jessica? I've gotten to interview Maddy several times, so I get to ask her all my burning questions. So I want to make sure that you get to ask anything else.
I think one thing that I haven't asked that I would love to is, Maddy, like what would be the number one thing that you feel women who are kind of in this 6-figure stage of business where like they've validated the business, like some money is coming through, but like there are roadblocks that you hit and there are crossroads that you hit between 6 and 7 and 8 figures. What would you say to those women who are like, I've got this spark of like, I know that I can have a massive impact in the world and my business needs to be considerably bigger than it is for that to happen. What advice would you give them?
Yeah. It was interesting. When I was starting, I had all these ideas of what was going to bring in business, right? I was like, oh, I just need to get some like articles in great places. And so I read this article that someone wrote about the chief of staff role. And I reached out to him because I was like, that's so interesting. Like, what made you write about that? How did you get that into where, you published it? And through that conversation with him, he was like, well, PR is great and everything, but nothing's going to replace prospecting. And I was like, oh, is that something I'm supposed to be doing? And I guess I just had never really thought about, so much of our early business came through my own personal network. And it was a lot of like hustle in the beginning, right? Like just telling people what we were doing and it had a lot of like just informational calls in the early days, right? And then we were lucky to have a lot of referrals, both through like my personal network and from our former clients and current clients and things like that. But I think if you don't have an actual plan, either yourself initially, obviously, right? Everybody starts with themselves, or by building some sort of sales or business development team, like you're just only going to get so far if you're just being receptive to what is coming in the door, right? Like at the end of the day, like you have to have a strategy around like, how are you going to get in front of your audience, right? And so we're not super strategic about our marketing. Like we now have a marketing company that's helping us be more strategic about that. We were very consistent and regular and therefore like help stay top of mind. And I think that's really important. Like, even if you have, like whatever, not a ton of resources, it's not that hard to put out a newsletter and a couple articles. I like the writing was always on the bottom of my to-do list. So I've had a ghostwriter forever. And in the early days, I used to like outline things for her and talk about all the things that I want to say. Eventually she just learned our industry and just writes everything. And I don't even think or talk about it anymore. But I think consistency in marketing, and then like an actual strategy for like how you're going to be reaching out to people. And initially, I think it can be your network, right? Like you can say, who are the connectors? Who are the like people who are in the know in my network who will be happy to sort of spread the word for me and get that out there. And for a long time, I was like, oh, I do not want to be those like spammy people on LinkedIn or with like cold emails or things like that. And it took us a long time to get there, but now I've just accepted that like, it's a little bit of a numbers game. You have to get in front of people. Right. And so like, for example, we are on the Inc. 5000 list for the second time this year, which was an amazing honor. I'm very excited. Woo! The people on that list are our target market, right? They're people who are leading, growing businesses, and that like many of them could use a chief of staff. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to the Inc. 5000 conference. I'm going to talk, whatever. I was on a panel, which was lovely. I met a ton of people. Who knows, like whether that will turn into business, right? You're like always sort of planting seeds everywhere. But we also had our sales team like dig up the email addresses of the people who won the Inc. 5000 and like do an email campaign to them, right? And so I think like, especially as women, a lot of times we don't want to be pushy. We don't want to be like sleazy marketers, right? Whatever. Like, we just don't want to impose on people somehow. And I think it's like changing the mindset that what you are doing is like letting people know about a thing that is valuable that might or might not be helpful to them, right? But like, it's not that big a deal if they get an email that they don't want, right? Like you delete it and you move on. And just sort of like knowing that it's a bit of a numbers game. And if you want to grow to be a big business, like you literally have to do stuff like that because you can't. I mean, we've been so fortunate to have a ton of inbound leads, like, but it's also unpredictable, right? Like you can't plan for how much is coming in the door if you're not doing active things to bring more things.
That makes so much sense. And I think that's the thing, when you're used to people reaching out to you, then like it can feel like a bit of a gear change to suddenly be like, oh, maybe we need to be approaching people and reaching out to them. That can feel like I coach women through that quite a lot because it's quite often a massive roadblock for them in terms of what is comfortable. Like isn't it great when you don't do anything and the leads come in? But exactly what you're saying, Maddy, we don't have control over that. And to get to a certain point in a business, you need to make it something that you can control and that you can be predicting like your numbers for the year ahead.
Yes, exactly. Well, we should close up this call for today, which I always hate because I would just love to stay on for like 7 hours and talk about all the things. But thank you so much, Maddy. Where can people find vChief? And one final quick question. What's one sign that someone is ready to hire a virtual chief of staff?
Well, on the sign for what you're ready, like, I think it's just that you have too much on your plate, and those things are not sort of lower level assistant level work, right? Like, I think a lot of people need both an assistant and a chief of staff, because like there's always like the really manual things that you don't need someone super strategic about. But if you need someone who is that right hand partner, who can talk you through challenges and who can take things off your plate that you would otherwise be doing, right? I think the biggest sign is like you're working way too much, right? And you're feeling stressed out and burnt out, and you feel like if you could just get like a handful of things off your plate, then you could focus where you have the most impact and be a better leader. So that's what I would say on that front. And thank you. You can find us at vchief.co or virtualchiefofstaff.com. And we're on LinkedIn under those names, and on Twitter we're at Virtual Chief. And yeah, that's and if people are interested, like there's a form on the website that they can fill out and get connected to our team. I'm also happy to connect with people individually if they, want some insight or advice or other things.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maddy and Jess, for this conversation. I feel like it was really fun and fortuitous. And as we all continue to grow our businesses, grow our lives, I just really want to say that it's important that we keep our lifestyle at the forefront and make sure that we are making choices and making decisions based on what we are wanting, because we didn't get into business in order to run ourselves ragged. We got ourselves into business because we have a big vision. And so that's what I invite ladies who are running 6, 7, and 8-figure businesses to look at, is how can you be part of a community, and how can you be in a space where you get to share with other women at and above your level. You can do that through the Dames. So if you want to check out a virtual roundtable, you can go to thedames.co/roundtable to see what it's like to be in a community of your peers having these kinds of deeper discussions, because they matter, and really talking about life and talking about the deeper topics that aren't just surface level is what makes it all worthwhile.
And I have loved being a member of the Dames. I've gotten so much out of it. Like the way you create spaces for people at different levels of business, like the 7-figure circle, we get on the phone with people with other similar sized businesses. And it's a really great opportunity to connect on both like meaty business questions and also just on a personal level of the things that we're going through in life. So I appreciate you for creating that space.
Thank you, Maddy. Appreciate you. Jessica, what would you like to say in closing, besides the fact that every woman growing her multi-6-figure business to 7 figures should work with Jessica? What else do we want to leave them with?
Do you know what? A lot of the issues that we've been talking about today really relate back to a tool that I love to use in my business, which is called Wealth Dynamics. It's 8 profiles arranged in a square. I always do this little thing when I describe it. And understanding what Wealth Dynamics profile you are is really important, because it helps you understand like what your magic formula is going to be for how you actually unlock that feeling of flow and ease in your business. I do not take on other people's frameworks lightly, but it really, when I did it, it was probably 18 months, 2 years ago. It really blew my mind. And I love it because it kind of feeds into stuff that I've been teaching for years in my business anyway. So if you are listening to this and you are wanting to understand more of like, who are you? What should you be doing? Like, why are you feeling a lack of purpose in your business? Why are you feeling a lack of energy? Why are you not jumping for joy every time you get to your desk? Reach out to me. We should talk about Wealth Dynamics. I do debriefs. Someone who's previously been on the show with us, Whitney, described it as a cross between therapy and a business intervention. And basically it is that. So if that sounds like the kind of thing that you're looking for, please do reach out to me, either connect with me on LinkedIn or come to my website, which is jessicafernley.com.
Brilliant and beautiful. Have a beautiful day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maddy. Thanks, Jess.